Hello, and welcome back to Egil Saga. There was a powerful Hersir in Sognafjord called Björn, who lived at Arland. His son, Brynjolf, inherited everything from him. Brynjolf had two sons, Björn and Thord, who were quite young when this episode took place. Björn was a great traveler and a most accomplished man, sometimes going on Viking raids and sometimes trading. One summer, Björn happened to be in Fjords at a well-attended feast, when he saw a beautiful girl whom he felt very attracted to. He asked about her family background, and was told she was a sister of Thorir Haraldsson, the Hersir, and was called Thora, of the embroidered hand. Björn asked for Thora's hand in marriage, but Thorir refused him, and they parted company. That same autumn, Björn gathered a large enough band of men to fill a boat, set off north to Fjords, and arrived at Thorir's farm when he was not at home. Björn took Thora away and carried her back home to Ireland. They were there for the winter, and Björn wanted to hold a wedding ceremony. His father, Brynjolf, disapproved of what Björn had done and regarded it as a disgrace to his long friendship with Thorir. "Rather than your marrying Thora here in my house without the permission of her brother Thorir," Brynjolf said to Björn, "she will be treated exactly as if she were my own daughter and your sister." And what Brynjolf ordered in his own home had to be obeyed, whether Björn liked it or not. Brynjolf sent messengers to Thorir to offer him reconciliation and compensation for the journey Björn had made. Thorir asked Brynjolf to send Thora home, saying that otherwise there would be no reconciliation. But Björn absolutely refused to return her, however much Brynjolf asked, and the winter passed in this way. One day, with spring when drawing near, Brynjolf and Björn discussed their plans. Brynjolf asked him what he intended to do. Björn said it was most likely he would go abroad. "Most of all," he said, "I would like you to let me have a longship and crew so that I can go raiding." "You cannot expect me to let you have a warship and big crew of men," said Brynjolf, "because for all I know you might turn up where I would least prefer you to. You have caused enough trouble as it is. I will let you have a trading ship and cargo. Go to Dublin, which is the most illustrious journey anyone can make at present. I will arrange a good crew to go with you." Björn said that he would have to accept what Brynjolf wanted. He had a good trading ship made ready and manned it. Then Björn prepared for the journey, taking plenty of time about it. When Björn had completed his preparations and a favourable wind got up, he boarded a boat with 12 other men and rowed to Ireland. They went to the farm, to his mother's room. She was sitting in there with a lot of other women. Thora was one of them. Björn said that Thora should go with him. They led her away, while Björn's mother asked the woman not to be so rash as to let the people know in the other part of the farmhouse, because Brynjolf would react badly if he found out, and serious trouble would develop between the father and son. Thora's clothing and belongings were all laid out ready for her, and Björn and his men took these with them. Then they went off to their ship at night, hoisted sail, and sailed out through Sognafjord into the open sea. The sailing weather was unfavourable, with a strong headwind, and they were tossed about at sea for a long time, because they were determined to keep as far away from Norway as possible. One day, as they sailed from the east towards Shetland in a gale, they damaged their ship when making land at Mausa. They unloaded the cargo and went to the fort there, taking all their goods with them, then beached their ship and repaired the damage. Just before winter, a ship arrived in Shetland from the Orkneys. The crew reported that a longship had landed in the Isles that autumn, manned by emissaries of King Harold, who had been sent to inform Earl Sigurd that the king wanted Björn Brynjolfsson killed wherever he might be caught. Similar messages were delivered in the Hebrides and all the way to Dublin. As soon as Björn arrived in the Shetlands, he married Thora, and they spent the winter in the fort of Mausa. In the spring, when the seas became calmer, Björn launched the ship and prepared it for sailing in great haste. When he was ready to set out and a favourable wind got up, he sailed out to the open sea. Driven by a powerful gale, They were only at sea for a short time before they neared the south of Iceland. The wind was blowing from the land and carried them west of Iceland and back out to sea. When a favourable wind got up again, they sailed towards land. None of the men on board had ever been to Iceland before. They sailed into an incredibly large fjord and were carried towards its western shore. Nothing could be seen in the direction of land but reefs and harbourless coast. Then they followed the land on a due east tack until they reached another fjord, which they entered and sailed right up until there were no more skerries and surf. They lay to at a promontory which was separated by a deep channel from an island offshore, and moored their ship there. There is a bay on the western side of the promontory, with a huge cliff towering above it. Bjorn set off in a boat with some men. He told his companions to be careful not to say anything about their voyage which could cause them trouble. Bjorn and his men rode to the farmstead and spoke to some people there. The first thing they asked was where they had made land. They were told that it was called Borgafjord. The farm there was Borg, and the farmer's name was Skallagrim. Bjorn realized at once who he was and went to see him, and they talked together. Skallagrim asked who these people were. Bjorn told him his name and his father's. Skallagrim was well acquainted with Brynwolf and offered to provide Bjorn with all the assistance he needed. Bjorn took the offer readily. Then Skallagrim asked who else of importance was on board, and Bjorn said that Thora was, the daughter of Harold, and sister of Thorir the Hersir, and that she was his wife. Skallagrim was pleased to hear this, and said it was his duty and privilege to grant the sister of his foster brother Thorir with such assistance as she needed, or he had the means to provide, and he invited her and Bjorn to stay with him, along with all the crew. Bjorn accepted the offer. Then the cargo was unloaded from the ship and carried into the hayfield at Borg. They set up camp there, and the ship was hauled up the stream that flows past the farm. The place where Bjorn made camp is called Bjarnartoder, Bjorn's Fields. Bjorn and all his crew went to stay with Skallagrim. He never had fewer than 60 armed men with him. That autumn, when ships arrived in Iceland from Norway, a rumour began to spread that Bjorn had run away with Thora without her kinsman's consent. For this offence the king had outlawed him from Norway. When this news reached Skallagrim, he called Bjorn in and asked about his marriage, whether it had been made with her kinsman's consent. I did not expect that Brynwolf's son would not tell me the truth, he said. Bjorn replied, I have only told you the truth, Grim. You should not criticize me for not telling you more than you asked. But I admit that it is true what you have heard. This match was not made with her brother's Thorir approval. Then Skallagrim said very angrily, Why did you have the audacity to come to me? Didn't you know how close my friendship with Thorir was? Bjorn replied, I knew that you were foster brothers and dear friends. But the reason I visited you was that my ship was brought ashore here, and I knew there was no point in trying to avoid you. My lot is now in your hands, but I expect fair treatment as a guest in your home. Then Thorolf, Skallagrim's son, came forward and made a long speech imploring his father not to hold this against Bjorn, after welcoming him to his home. Many other people put in a word for him. In the end, Skallagrim calmed down and said that it was up to Thorolf to decide. You can take care of Bjorn if you wish. Treat him as well as you please. Thora gave birth to a daughter that summer. The girl was sprinkled with water and given the name Asgard. Bera assigned a woman to look after her. Bjorn and all his crew spent the winter with Skallagrim. Thorolf sought Bjorn's friendship and followed him around everywhere. One day, early in spring, Thorolf spoke to his father and asked him what he planned to do for his winter guest Bjorn, and what help he would provide for him. Skallagrim asked Thorolf what he had in mind. I think Bjorn would want to go to Norway above all else, said Thorolf, if he could be at peace there. The best course of action would seem to be if you sent messengers to Norway and offered a settlement on Bjorn's behalf. Thorir will hold your words in great respect. Thorolf was so persuasive that Skallagrim gave in and found men to go abroad that summer. They brought messages and tokens to Thorir Horodsson and sought a settlement between him and Bjorn. When Brynolf heard the message that they had brought, he set his mind on offering compensation for his son Bjorn. The matter ended with Dodder accepting a settlement for Bjorn because he realized that Bjorn had nothing to fear from him under the circumstances. Brynolf accepted the settlement on Bjorn's behalf, and Skallagrim's messenger stayed for the winter with Dodder, while Bjorn spent the winter with Skallagrim. The following summer, Skallagrim's messengers set off back to Iceland. When they returned in the autumn, they reported that a reconciliation had been made for Bjorn in Norway. Bjorn stayed a third winter with Skallagrim, and the following spring he prepared to leave, along with the band of men who had been with him. When Bjorn was ready to set off, Beda said that she wanted her foster daughter Asgard to remain behind. Bjorn and his wife agreed, and the girl stayed there, and was brought up with Skallagrim's family. Thorolf joined Bjorn on the voyage, and Skallagrim equipped him for the journey. He left with Bjorn that summer. They had a smooth passage and left the open sea at Sognafjord. Bjorn sailed into Sognafjord and went to visit his father. Thorolf went with him, and Brynolf received them warmly. Then word was sent to Thorir. He and Brynolf arranged a meeting when Bjorn attended too, and they clinched their settlement. Thorir paid the money he had been keeping for Thora, and he and Bjorn became friends, as well as kinsmen-in-law. Bjorn stayed at Aurland with Brynolf, and Thorolf stayed with them too and was well treated. For the most part, King Harald had his residence at Hordaland or Rogaland on the estates he owned there at Utsten, Alvadsnes, Fitjar, Arstad, Lygra, or Seim. That particular winter, however, the king was in the north. After spending the winter and spring in Norway, Bjorn and Thorolf prepared their ship, mustered a crew, and set off for the summer on Viking raids in the Baltic, coming back in the autumn with great wealth. On their return, they heard that King Harald was at Rogaland and would be wintering there. King Harald was growing very old by this time, and many of his sons were fully grown men. Eirik, Harald's son, who is nicknamed Blood Axe, was still young then. He was being fostered by Thorir the Hersir. The king loved Eirik the most of all his sons, and Thorir was on the best of terms with the king. Bjorn, Thorolf, and their men went to Ireland first after returning to Norway, then set off north to visit Thorir the Hersir in Fjords. They had a warship, which they had acquired while raiding that summer, rowed by 12 or 13 oarsmen on each side, with almost 30 men on board. It was richly painted above the plumb line and exceptionally beautiful. When they arrived, Thorir gave them a good welcome, and they spent some time there, leaving their ship at anchor with its awnings up near the farm. One day Thorolf and Bjorn went down from the farm to the ship. They could see Eirik, the king's son, repeatedly boarding the ship, then going back to land to admire it from there. Then Bjorn said to Thorolf, "The king's son seems fascinated by the ship. Ask him to accept it as a gift from you, because I know it will be a great boon to us if Eirik is our spokesman. I have heard that the king is ill-disposed towards you on account of your father." Thorolf said this was a good plan. Then they went down to the ship, and Thorolf said, "You're looking at the ship very closely, Prince. What do you think of it?" "I like it," he replied. "It's a very beautiful ship." "Then I would like to give you the ship," said Thorolf, "if you will accept it." "I will accept it," said Eirik. "You will not think the pledge of my friendship much of a reward for it, but that is likely to be worth more the longer I live." Thorolf said that he thought such a reward much more valuable than the ship. They parted, and afterwards the prince was very warm towards them. Bjorn and Thorolf approached Thorir about whether he thought it was true that the king was ill-disposed towards Thorolf. Thorir did not conceal the fact that he had heard such a thing. "Then I would like you to go and see the king," said Bjorn, "and put Thorolf's case to him, because Thorolf and I will always meet the same fate. That is the way he treated me when I was in Iceland." In the end, Thorolf promised to visit the king and asked him to try to persuade Eirik to go with him. When Bjorn and Thorolf discussed the matter with Eirik, he promised his assistance in dealing with his father. Then Thorolf and Bjorn went on their way to Sognafjord, while Thorir and Prince Eirik manned the warship he had recently been given, and went south to meet the king in Hordaland. He welcomed them warmly. They stayed there for some while, waiting for an opportunity to approach the king when he was in a good mood. When they broached the subject with him and told him that a man had arrived by the name of Thorolf, Skallagrim's son, we wanted to ask the king to remember all the good that his kinsmen have rendered to you, but not to make him suffer for what his father did in avenging his brother. Although Thorir spoke diplomatically, the king was somewhat curt in his replies, saying that Gveldolf and his sons posed a great threat to them, and he expected this Thorolf to have a similar temperament to his kinsmen. All of them are so overbearing they never know when to stop, he said, and they pay no heed to whom it is they are dealing with. Then Eirik spoke up and told him how Thorolf had made friends with him and given him a fine present, the ship that they had brought with him. I have promised him my absolute friendship. Few people will make friends with me if this counts for nothing. Surely you would not let this happen, father, to the first man who has given me something precious. In the end, the king promised to leave Thorolf in peace. But I do not want him to come see me, he said. You may hold him as dear as you wish, Eirik, or any of his kinsmen, but either they will treat you more gently than they have me, or you will regret this favor you ask of me, especially if you allow them to remain with you for any length of time. Then Eirik Bloodaxe and Thorir and his men went back to Fjords and sent a message to Thorolf about the outcome of their meeting with the king. Thorolf and Bjorn spent the winter with Brynwolf. They spent many summers on Viking raids, staying with Brynwolf for the winters and with Thorir for the others. Eirik Bloodaxe came to power and ruled Hordaland and Fjords. He took men into his service and kept them with him. One spring, Eirik Bloodaxe made preparations for a journey to Permia and chose his men carefully for the expedition. Thorolf joined Eirik and served as a standard-bearer at the prow of his ship, just like his father had been. Thorolf was outstandingly large and strong. Many things of note took place on that journey. Eirik fought a great battle by the river Dvina in Permia, and emerged the victor, as the poems about him relate. And on the same journey he married Gunhild, daughter of Ozir Snout, and brought her back home with him. Gunhild was outstandingly attractive and wise, and well versed in the magic arts. Thorolf and Gunhild struck up a close friendship. Thorolf would spend the winters with Eirik and go on Viking raids in the summer. The next thing that happened was that Bjorn's wife, Thora, fell ill and died. A short time later, Bjorn took another wife, Olaf, daughter of Erling the Wealthy from Ostero. Bjorn and Olaf had a daughter named Gunhild. And there is a man named Thorgir Thornfoot who lived at Fenring in Hordaland, at the place called Ask. He had 3 sons. One was named Had, another Berg Onund, and the third Atli the Short. Berg Onund was uncommonly strong, pushy, and troublesome. Atli was short, squarely built, and powerful. Thorgir was wealthy and made many sacrifices to the gods, and was well versed in the magic arts. Had went on Viking raids and was rarely at home. Tack ska du ha.